This book is literally taking care of like 3 major goals. I just need to read it. Hey y'all, my name is Nat. I hope you're having a terrific day today. And for this video, we're going to be talking about my TBR for all of 2025. Alright, before I get into anything bookish, make sure to hit like and subscribe down below, as well as tell me in the comments what are some challenges you're making for yourself this year. Do you have a set list for 2025? Are you doing like 12 recommendations by 12 friends? Any bingos? Because I know a lot of new bingo challenges have been coming out lately. Let's talk about it in the comments. I really considered doing a 25 books in 2025, but honestly, I don't want to be that structured. I don't want to be that bogged down. I already feel like I'm going to have that slightly just with the current challenges I'm participating in, and I don't want to do it even more so. As much as I do structure a lot of my reading, I actually do enjoy mood reading. I like being able to pick up what I'm in the mood for at that time. And if I'm giving myself all of these 20 million goals to do, if I'm already making a giant TBR for the entirety of the year, I feel like I won't really have that at all. So with that being said, once again, I decided to stick with 10 books for 2025. I think that's going to be manageable. I think it's going to be pretty easy. I made sure a good few of these come from my owned TBR. I also made sure that a few of them are ending out some series. So I'm going to be like doubling up when it comes to completing goals with this list. One of my biggest goals for the year is to work down this owned TBR, baby. And so I figured, let's go with the book that I've owned the longest and have still yet to read. H's and Hunted by Lawrence Treat. Josh actually gave this to me from his grandmother's collection, and it is super cool, I will say. Look at this like indented cover. I've never seen anything like this anywhere else. But this is following this man who was once a career criminal. However, he's since cleaned up his act, but somehow he once again gets himself in a skeezy situation, and he is the main suspect. So he has to figure out what happened in order to clear his own name. Honestly, a really basic mystery, but it is from the 1940s. And then again, with this really cool cover, I can't help it. I'm intrigued. I really hope that I like it so I can keep it on my shelves and maybe even display it because it's just so unique. Then another little thing that I tend to slide in with this 10 books list is the book that is currently the oldest one on my Goodreads TBR. I've had Goodreads for a really freaking long time. So this one's actually from 2019, and I'm pretty sure I added it because of one of those lists, this like, 50 books to read in your lifetime, or like 50 most hard-hitting reads, something like that. And it's What's Eating Gilbert Grape by Peter Hedges. Now, I know this is a movie with Leonardo DiCaprio. I've never actually seen it. I don't actually know what this book is about, if I'm being completely honest, but it's on my TBR. I don't really have a strong reason to kick it off my TBR or to assume I'm going to not like it. So I figure, why not? It's not very long. I'll just go ahead and add it on this list and finally get it read. Next is a book that is on my own TBR as well as completes a series. So this one I really need to get read. Honestly, I thought I would read it as soon as I bought it, but video plans got away from me and that didn't happen. All the Hidden Paths by Foz Meadows. This is the second book in their Tithonai. I'm still not really sure how to pronounce the name of the series, but the Tithonai Chronicles. First book being A Strange and Stubborn Endurance, which I really enjoyed last year. In that one, we're following the main character who is a he's not a prince, but he's like a duke or a lord or something of that nature. And unfortunately for him, his father has just found out his sexuality in a rather unpleasant way, worsened by the fact that he had just recently been set up in an arranged marriage with a princess from their neighboring country. However, said neighboring country doesn't really have an issue with his sexuality, and so instead they're like, okay, why don't you just marry our prince then? His father agrees to this, not only to stick with the treaty, but also to hide the situation and his son. Poor Velison is in a new country, disowned, engaged to a man he has never met. And not long after that, he keeps getting attacked by people. That ends up spraying into a mystery that the newlyweds are determined to solve themselves, and I really enjoyed that first book. I think Meadows really created both the characters so incredibly well, had them go through so much reflection and growth, and by the end of it, I was totally sold on the budding relationship between these two. This one continues on with our characters who are now happily married and trying to, establish a normal life together for the first time after everything they lived through at the end of the first book. But unfortunately, politics prevail and their life is not that easy. I do think there's also supposed to be a new perspective introduced here, which I'm not really sure what's going to happen there, but I'm super intrigued one way or another, and I'm just excited to see more of these characters. The fact that it's on the chunkier side was definitely a bit of a deterrent for me picking it up, however. Oh, actually, now that I say that, if this is over 500 pages, that means this book is literally taking care of like 3 major goals. I just need to read it. Speaking of a book I just need to read, Mary by Nat Cassidy. The number of TBRs this has been on is ridiculous. I keep saying I'm gonna pick it up. Technically speaking, I did at one point. I got 17 pages in. That bookmark, That's been in there for months because it kept getting put down. It actually did get put on a TBR and specifically set up for a video, but then that video kind of got pushed on the back burner and it's still on the back burner. So of course this book kept falling victim to other books that I needed to prioritize for other videos, but I want to read it. I want to read it so badly. This is actually influenced by Carrie from Stephen King, except instead of a teenage girl getting her period, it is a woman who is starting menopause. Except she insists that's not what's happening, but everybody keeps telling her that's all it is. Blends Midsummer with elements of American Psycho and a pinch of I'll Be Gone in the Dark. Need to read it. I just need to read it. Next up, I am back to finishing series with 𝗖cie by Amy Kaufman and Jay Kristoff. This is the third book in the Illuminae Files series, and I have been enjoying this series. I did take a little bit of a break from it because after reading the second book and realizing it's essentially the plot of the first book revamped, I was a little nervous to go into this third one in case that's what happened again. That's not necessarily a bad thing. It's like comparing adventure movies, Indiana Jones's. I mean, I'm still going to enjoy it. I just thought I would probably enjoy it more if I had a little bit of time away from it. But this is a sci-fi series set in the future where we're following different colonies who are trying to survive out in space. Serious disasters keep happening on these many different ships. I am curious to see how things are going to round out in this final book, especially because it seemed like the events from the first book were starting to affect what was going on in the second book at the end specifically. I do want to see how things are going to wrap out. This is another book that will count for my Doorstoppers challenge as well, because this baby I think is like 700 pages. It's going to be completing 3 goals and I'm hopeful that I will enjoy it. Next is an author that I've really been wanting to read more from, and so putting her on this list means I have an excuse to do so. That'd be Rebecca Ross, and specifically I'm looking at A River Enchanted. I've heard a lot of positive things about this duology, and obviously after loving the Letters of Enchantment series from her, I'm really excited to see what else she has in store. I also think this is an adult series, so I'm hoping perhaps it goes a little bit darker, a little bit more intense than Ross did in the Letters of Enchantment series, but even still, her writing is absolutely beautiful. It draws you into the story. It's incredibly atmospheric, and then just, oh my gosh, some of these lines are so moving and so heart-wrenching. I believe in this one we were following the woman who has become the head of her village and young girls keep disappearing. She ends up enlisting the help of her childhood frenemy who has recently returned, and I think his utilization of music is gonna be what helps them find these women or put a stop to it, something like that. I'm not really sure, but I've heard so many good things and I am very excited to get to it. Unfortunately, it's about 30 pages shy for my Doorstopper challenge, but one way or another, I'm still excited. Then there's Along Came Amour by Alexis Daria, which is the final in her Primas of Power series. I've really enjoyed the female main characters in the series and the relationship that the 3 cousins have, plus the comedy has all been really fun. So I'm excited to close things out with this one. This is following the final cousin, Ava, who is a divorced school teacher. And unfortunately, since her divorce, has really just been questioning everything she does in her life, wondering if this is what she wants to be doing, if this is gonna make her happy. But when this really hot guy starts flirting with her and offers her a no strings attached relationship, she decides to hop on that, literally. I'm sorry. The pun was unintended, but I just couldn't resist. But of course, with every friends with benefits situation, with every no strings attached one night stand, obviously feelings are going to develop. I wouldn't say this series is probably going to become a new favorite romance series, but at the very least it's been a lot of fun, and so I am excited to close it out with this final one. Then for these final 3, I didn't want to do another 12 recommendations by 12 friends just because, as I was saying at the start, I felt like I got too bogged down with it last year. So instead I decided to have my 3 best friends pick a book for me for this 10 books list, and I learned my lesson from last year. They had to think I would like it. So starting at the top from Allie, she picked 𝗖cie by V.E. Schwab for me. This is not a hard task at all. I've been wanting to read more of Schwab's work. 𝗖cie has gotten so much praise. I believe this is one of those that like starts at the end and then moves backwards, but we're following these 2 best friends who start investigating incidences where people have a near-death experience and then end up with superpowers, and they're determined to have that happen to themselves so they can become supervillains. This is also up there for a really old book on my Goodreads TBR, so not really complaining about it. Plus I get to read more of V.E. Schwab's work, an author who I've really been wanting to return to. Thanks, Al. You did great for me. Next from Kat, she picked The Deal by Elle Kennedy, which I'm nervous for. The reason I said yes is I'm pretty sure that whenever these books got republished with new covers, I think they might have gotten some extra editing in. So that gave me a little bit of hope that this might go better for me. I know this is a new adult hockey romance series. I am fairly certain that this first one has some enemy slivers energy. It might be like bad boy, good girl, possibly. I'm like really stretching to remember this. It's been a minute since we talked about this. I'm hopeful. That's all I'll say. And lastly, for Molly, I really thought she was going to give me another shipwreck book, but she happily surprised me by giving me Midnight Girls by 𝗖cie Ich𝘁𝘁. I actually read The Dark Tide by this author, was it last year? I think it might have been. And I did enjoy it. I believe this one is also a sapphic fantasy with romance, and I don't really know anything else about it. I've definitely heard people talk about it before, and I've heard good things. So here's hoping this one will also go well for me. Now, although I'm only doing 10 books for 2025, I do still have multiple other reading challenges ongoing. So for the rest of this video, I thought I would give you guys a little bit of a look at what I am planning for these, starting out with my Reddit fantasy bingo board for 2024. This will close out at the end of March, so I do still have some time, but I only have 2 spaces left, luckily. My goal was to clear this board, and I am nearly freaking there. Bard and Orcs, Trolls, Goblins, Oh My. For Bard, I've been saying since the beginning that I'll be reading A River Enchanted by Rebecca Ross for this one, and I'm going to stick with it. It's just too perfect not to. As for the other prompt I have left, I didn't 100% buy this book to complete the prompt. It did sound like a fun time, but it didn't hurt the fact that this could complete the prompt. An Orc on the Wild Side by Tom Holt. I bought this one for my Come Book Shopping With Me vlog from last year, so I'll put a link to that in the cards. I'll tell you what specifically sold me on it, because every time it kind of makes me chuckle. Being the Dark Lord and Prince of Evil is not as much fun as it sounds, particularly if you're a basically decent person. But the point is that he's really keen to be a lot less despicable than his predecessors. Not that the other goblins appreciate Mordok's attempts to redefine the role. Why should they, when their new healthcare program seems designed to actually extend life expectancy, and his efforts to end a perfectly reasonable war with the dwarves appear to have become an obsession. When I read that, it sounded really fun. You know, having like real world, very realistic things in this sort of a fantasy setting. It just sounds really entertaining, kind of a la Legends and Lattes, but I'm hoping this will have higher stakes, which will work better for me. I've also just never heard anybody talk about this, which does intrigue me. And at this point, I own it. So, you know, why would I not read it for this? So I have 3 months to read those 2 books. And as long as I do, I'll have finished out this bingo board. And then the last bingo project I have ongoing is the horror bingo created by Wicked Reading. And I have already started into this one. It did start on October 1st of 2024. So I do still have a good few months to work this down. My goal, again, is to focus on books I currently own. Unfortunately, for the first one published in 2024, I will not complete hard mode because I didn't read a 2024 release last year, and I'm still kicking myself about it. But I do still have a few options for it, and I will be sticking with either I Was a Teenage Slasher by Stephen Graham Jones or Bury Your Gaze by Chuck Tingle. Both of these came out last year. I heard a lot of positive things about both of them, and I really want to read both of them. Hopefully one of them will happen. On the next one, unfortunately, I have come to realize that my pick won't work for hard mode, seeing as how there isn't an epilogue in it, but I do think I will stick with American Rapture by CJ Lead for the End Times Are Near prompt. Apocalyptic stories aren't really my usual thing. However, this author I know I really enjoy. The themes that are going to be discussed here I know are very up my alley. So at the very least, I'm hopeful that those aspects will ensure that I do enjoy this book, even though apocalypse aren't really my style. Still not 100% sure on This Is Halloween, seeing as how not many books have Halloween stamped right on them, nor do they say whether or not trick-or-treating is mentioned for the hard mode. If I find it in a book, then it'll count. If you happen to know one or have some recommendations though, leave them in the comments. The next 2 I have already completed, and yes, they do in fact differ from the ones I had laid out in my TBR. Oh well. But moving on to the next line with Honoring the Classics, specifically for hard mode to read a book that came out before 1950. I am planning to read Dracula by Bram Stoker, and I'm going to be doing the setup where I start in May and I read each section for each day. So this is going to be a really long project because it spans from May to November, which I've just now realized will mean technically I won't complete this by October. Well, I might have to rush a little bit, or I might have to find an alternative. Next, for translated, I originally was looking at a specific version of Carmilla that had notes in it by Carmen Maria Machado. However, the hard mode is to have a book with a translator note. And I did see a copy of it and flipped through, did not see a translator note. So I am gonna have to change it. And specifically, I'm looking at some horror novellas that I've been recommended from either Jen Agaton or my friend Tiffany from The Layer. Both of them read a lot of short horror last year, and there were a good few translated ones included in those lists. So I'm hoping one of them will have a translator note, whichever one I find. it'll be slid in here. Next and completed one is Reaper Read. Hard mode is where death is personified. I'm not 100% sure on this, but I did have a realization that perhaps We Sold Our Souls by Grady Hendrix might work, seeing as how a member of the main character's rock band made a deal with the devil in order to become a successful star, and so perhaps like she'll interact with that character, and like by extension he's kind of reminiscent of death. Maybe? Yes, I realize that even if it does work, this is kind of stretching it, but a girl can be hopeful. On to the next row with Dead Man Walking. I don't currently have a hard mode one that is part of a series, but I am still looking at A Botanical Daughter by Noah Medlock, seeing as how it's supposed to be a queer romance with a horrific Frankenstein, except like instead of the type of science from Frankenstein, it's like mushrooms and plant matter. It sounds weird, but it also seems like it'll work for this one, and I already own it. So then there is genre bending, and hard mode is a genre you don't usually read. I think for this one I'm gonna go with A Certain Hunger by Chelsea G. Summers, seeing as how I believe this is like a literary horror, and I don't really read literary stories, but even with that, I've heard the writing in this is really good, and the setup of the story definitely sounds up my alley. I mean, a main character who is a food critic and also happens to eat people. Sounds weird. I'm in. Then I've got a 5-star read. Hard mode was also a 5-star prediction, and this is me putting it out into the universe once again that I Will Get Married by Nat Cassidy read. And here's me also hoping that it will be a 5-star. Fingers crossed. As for cryptid, I think I'm going to go with Empire of Wild by Sherry Dimeline, seeing as how the basis of this is from the Matisse legend of the Rougarou, a werewolf-like creature that haunts the road and woods of native people's communities. Prior to this book, I had not heard of it. I don't know the lore around it, which is kind of hard for me to do, seeing as how I used to be really obsessed with cryptids and have had many deep dives on Wikipedia for them. This one though, unfamiliar, so it would work for hard mode, and also a book that I'm just really looking forward to. On the next row for Title Has a Number, this won't work for hard mode, but I figure, you know, manga titles do technically have numbers when it comes to the volume number. So Mariko-chan by Tomoki Uzumi will give me an excuse to start into this series that I've been wanting to read. Josh and I actually watched the anime of it, so I'm excited to see how it changes in the manga, but also I think the storyline continues in the manga after where the anime is currently paused. Mariko-chan is a normal high school girl, except unfortunately she can see ghosts, and she does her best to not let them know that, and it leads to some really silly and funny situations, but also some slightly terrifying ones. So like I said, I've been wanting to read this series, and this is the perfect excuse to do so. Next one is Satanic Panic. Hard mode is to have a item that is actually from the occult, and so I am looking at The Spirit Bears Its Teeth by Andrew Joseph White, still planning to stick with this one, as we're following this trans man who is a medium, and his family wants to take away his abilities by marrying him off to this guy that'll like sever his powers or something like that. Of course he refuses and ends up getting put into a sanatorium. Seeing as how he's a medium, I assume some sort of occult item will be involved. I've heard a lot of positive things about this one, and seeing as how I really enjoyed the first book I read from this author, I am hopeful that I will love this one as well. Next up, multiple POVs, hard mode, multiple timelines, and I believe Confessions by Kane Minato fulfills this. I'm pretty sure it fulfills both of them, and it's been on my TBR for quite some time now, so here's my chance to finally get it read. On to the last row, starting out with As Seen on the Big Screen, hard mode if you haven't actually seen the adaptation yet. Hopefully, I will be reading Dark Places by Gillian Flynn sometime in January, perhaps for Winterween. If so, that would work perfectly. We're following this woman who was the only survivor of her brother, who was a family annihilator, and she was the sole testimony that sent him away. However, now as an adult, she's returned home and is starting to question whether or not that's what actually happened. Somehow, I've still yet to be spoiled for this, and I'm really thankful for that in this moment. Still not really sure about Out of My Comfort Zone and repeat author. I'm still digging for this because my comfort zone's pretty wide. I do tend to read most genres in some capacity. I just obviously prioritize some above others. Yeah, I'm still trying to figure out what I'm gonna slide in here. As for short story collection, I do realize It Came From the Closet doesn't technically work for a short story collection, but it's what I currently have slid in. Hard mode is if there's 12 or more, which of course I don't know until I actually like see this book. But this is an essay collection from many different authors who are kind of talking about their experience with horror in regard to their queer identity, and it sounds very good. I've also heard a lot of positive things about it. More up my alley than short stories, which I just don't really tend to vibe with. Then we've got a TBR vet. Hard mode is if it has been on my TBR for more than 2 years, and I'm fairly certain H's and Hunted by Lawrence Treat. We'll complete that. Another one that's gonna be doing double duty. Finally, for creepy crawlies, hard mode creepy crawlies are also on the cover. I was originally looking at She's a Haunting by Trang Tran Tran. I'm still considering this one. However, I did realize that technically Shiver by Junji Ito could fulfill hard mode on this one, and it's a graphic novel, which means I could get through it quicker. Seeing as how Josh officially lives with me now, I also have this on my shelves, and I have been wanting to try out some of Junji Ito's stuff. Very well-known horror graphic artist, and definitely unsettles me already just from looking at this cover. I'm sure I'm not alone in that. I do want to tip my toe in, and this would be the perfect opportunity to kind of make that happen. So we'll see. On that note, yeah, you can see I already had a lot of TBR plans going into 2025, hence I didn't need to do a 25 for 2025. Of course I could have doubled up on them, but like, where's the fun in that? I'd rather just be a little bit more laid back. I say as though I didn't just give you well over 20 books that I need to read this year already. So on that note, that is it for today, y'all. Thank you so much for coming to my channel. I really appreciate it. Make sure to hit like and subscribe down below. If you made it all the way to the end of this video, leave me a bug emoji in the comments. I have all my socials as well as a few ways you can support me linked in the description. I come out videos on Monday and Friday, but until then, I hope you continue to have a terrific day. Love you, bye!